All right, guys, how you doing? It's Rabea. I hope you're all well. So I really appreciate the feedback on the dialing in series that I kind of accidentally fell into. Was never really planning on doing like a dialing in series, but it's turned out to be that way. And recently on my community page on YouTube, I asked you guys for suggestions for other dialing in videos, because obviously there's loads of different things you could dial in theory, but I wanted to know what you guys wanted. So the question still stands. If you've got more ideas, please put them in the comment section below. But in this video, I wanted to talk about dialing in high gain tones, metal tones, I guess, and my approach to heavy metal, high gain tones. And that covers mainly rhythm, but we could touch on lead a little bit in this video, although lead tone is a completely different thing in my opinion. So in this video, I wanted to talk about high gain tones, metal tones, my approach to them. Just a quick one, I want to apologize for background noise in case you can hear the fans going, because we're experiencing a heat wave right now in the UK. It's very hot and I need these bad boys to keep me cool. I want to start this video with a little bit of a caveat. I don't personally consider myself like a metal player. I like heavy music and I guess genres of metal, if you want to call it that. But there are many more qualified people to talk about high gain metal tones. First person that comes to mind is Ola Englund. I'm sure you guys who watch my channel or subscribe to his channel, he is the master of chugs and metal tones. So if you want the authority on how to dial in those kind of tones, then please, obviously check his channel out. So I figured with regards to high gain metal tones, there's no better place to start than to use a 5150. In my case, a 5150 Mark II, because my Mark I fired it up just before shooting this and it sounds like it's broken. I need to work out why. No power, no low end, just a ton of fizz. I think it might need new tubes. It definitely needs looking at. But this had a fresh set of tubes and preamp tubes in it the last time I used it, so it's running perfectly now. And you may have noticed I've got my Super Kraken sat on top because, again, this amplifier from Victory is marketed as a metal amplifier. I personally believe it does a bunch more than just metal. We'll talk about it more in a little bit, because there are certain controls and characteristics of high gain amplifiers that constitute to a metal tone, some of which the Victory amp doesn't necessarily adopt, such as a presence control. I also have a pedal board set up on the floor. Now you can see there are a bunch of pedals on there. Don't really worry about the stuff in the loop, that's just for a bit of fun, but we've got reverb and delay from Strymon. The moods on there from Chase Bliss, probably won't use that, I just wanted to keep it on the board anyway. But in front, outside of the tuner, we've got the 29 pedals Una, which I thought would be interesting because it's basically an active EQ that gives you 12.5 dB boost around, I can't remember what the high is, 12K, 2.5K for the high mids, and I think 120 hertz for the low. Can't quite remember, but it'd probably be quite useful when we move on to the Kraken. However, the only pedal we're really focusing on this board is the Maxon OD808, which is a tube screamer. It's a very well-renowned tube screamer in the world of metal, probably one of the most popular when it comes to high gain metal tones in front of something like a 5150. I was going to use the precision drive, but that might be a bit less common. It has a gate on it, which would have been useful, and also that's very common in the world of high gain metal tones because, of course, it's high gain, so you're going to get lots of noise. But I figured I'm going to rise to the challenge of not using a gate and see what happens. It's really important just to mention the guitar. Now I'm using my Music Man with my silos in, which are high output. That's very common in the world of high gain tones, high output pickups. A lot of people like active pickups or just high output pickups. Now, these are high output, so we should be fine. However, they're voiced less of a scoop smiley face, which you'd find in a lot of high gain metal guitars as such. But it's worth pointing out that, you probably want high output pickups for these kind of tones too. And this is what it sounds like straight in. So, first thing I'll point out is the master is quite low. It's a 120 watt amplifier, so it's bloody loud. I've also mic'd it up with two 57s, one on a V30 and one on a G12H65. It's really important to point out that cabs make a huge difference. Most high gain players use V30. Now, in terms of V30s, if you watch or follow Nolly, you'll know that they all sound different and there are many that are better than others depending on the era you get them. I honestly don't know what era this V30 is in this Kraken cab. All I know is that this Kraken cab has been toured extensively and these speakers are well worn in. So hopefully that will help in some way towards getting a nice metal tone. But the cab is very important, remember that. In terms of the controls, the pre-gain, or on this amp it's called pre and post, pre being the preamp gain and post being the power amp section. But anyway, pre is around 7, so it's quite a lot of gain. The low end is boosted, and then what's quite common you'll find is the mids have been scooped quite a bit. Now, in more modern metal and progressive metal, the mids is everything. That's something very important to say. Everyone cranks the mids, super honky, but when we're talking about high gain metal chugging tone, you actually probably want less mids because they're just going to make things sound a little bit boxy and quack a bit when you're doing chugs. You want that scooped, punchy kind of tone, which comes from scooping the mids a little bit. In terms of the high end, that's boosted to around 7 as well. And then the post gain is quite low. Then in the master section, we've got resonance and presence. Now, resonance is going to give you that low rumbly sound. It's the easiest way to describe it. It's low rumbly. It's like way down low in the low end. And basically, by turning the resonance up, that's going to give the whole amp more like thunderous low end. And I also think that's quite common as well, to have the bass boosted a little bit so that when you dig in, it punches, and then people use a tube screamer to tighten everything up. Now, the presence is obviously, as you can see on the close-up, is boosted to 7 as well. So we're actually dialing in a lot of presence, a lot of high end. In terms of the Maxon OD808, the drive, it's set in its kind of classic position. The drive is down right down low. Tone is boosted just above 1 o'clock, and the balance, or the level, is boosted to around 2 o'clock, just over. And that's going to give us the classic tube screamer effect when it's sending a bunch of signal into the front of the amp. A tube screamer is mid-forward, so it tends to tighten up the low end. So that's why when boosting these lows and the resonance and turning a tube screamer on, it has the opposite effect. You get the lows and the resonance from the amp itself, and then the tube screamer tightens everything up, and it should give you a nice punchy, tight chug. But anyway, before we mess around with the controls a little bit more, this is the kind of bass tone that I wanted to set for the 5150, because I figured that made most sense for essentially the sound of an amplifier that's high gain before we do any boosting out front. So as you can hear, it's tight. It's gainy, but it's not ridiculous gainy. And I think when you're chugging, especially in metal, there's a lot more gain that you can hear in the tones. Well, actually, when you're double tracking, you want less gain, because as you layer it up, it's almost like a cascading effect. It gives you more and more gain as an effect, especially stereo pan guitars. However, because this is just a single guitar, we're just gonna mess around with the tube screamer now. So this is without. Now, if I turn it on, this is kind of how I dial in the amplifier. If someone said, give me a metal tone, this is pretty much what it would be. I might mess about with the mid control a bit and see where I can find something that works. I prefer like an aggressive approach to the sound of metal. Less just gain, punch and thickness, and more like an aggressive, angry sound from the amplifier. This is definitely more metal than I would normally, personally, dial in. I would say personally for me, there's a bit too much gain so that it's actually feels a bit messy. Specifically when I'm doing like... So I'm just going to back the gain down to like 5. I might boost the balance all the way up on the Maxon. So at the minute, as I said, the mids have been scooped. I'm going to put those mids at halfway, not touch anything else, and see what happens. See, for me, it's fun when you're playing big open chords. And again, I've boosted the mids just now below halfway. But for me, it's just a bit too messy. I prefer a tighter, you know. Let's try a high end at 8. Throw on a bit of reverb and delay, do some lead. And the thing is, the tube screw makes such a difference overall for the aggression. Like, that's thick and punchy. Well, not punchy as such, it's thick. Soon you should throw that tube screamer on. I think when you do proper scooped mids, like really scooped, what about now? I've scooped the mids almost all the way out. The bass is up, the treble's really up, and then the resonance and the presence are up, and I've got the tube screamer on. And for me, that's way more fun. By having the mids up and the tube screamer on with all that gain, it tends to get a bit messy, but somehow, when you're scooping all those mids out, like literally, it's below 2. By scooping all those mids out, that's where I'm finding I'm getting a more pleasurable experience when it comes to riffing. I think we found, for me at least, the sweet spot of the 5150 with the tube screamer to get the kind of metal tone I would dial in. I think the cool thing to do now would be to move over to the Super Kraken because it doesn't have a presence control. And it's basically very different, even though it was inspired by the 5150. I think it's probably a good opportunity to see what kind of metal tone I can dial in with that. It's an amp I'm more comfortable with in a lot of ways. And we might find that it's a completely different approach to the kind of metal tone that I would dial in, high gain metal tone. So let's see what happens. Okay, so I've plugged in the Super Kraken, and first thing I'll say is that this amplifier doesn't have a presence control, something that Martin and I, when we were designing it, didn't feel it was necessary. Neither did we feel that on the original Kraken. Because, in my opinion, when you're playing live, or at least my approach to high gain tones is a bit different, I guess, from you classic metal players, in the sense that presence seems to be quite important. They want that sort of high-end information that I call it fizz, but that might be slightly derogatory. I don't mean that. But like, they want that high-end information. And I personally feel like when I'm recording, it depends on where the mics are placed and what you can do in post. When I'm playing live, it depends where the mics are placed. I often find that a lot of bands that I saw play live back in the day, it was too fizzy. It was just too shrill, too harsh, because they'd dial in all that presence, and then people put mics on the cabs, come out the PA, and it was just too intense. And even when people use modelers like the Line 6 guys back in the day, all these like metal, whatever you call it, like post-hardcore metal, whatever, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of fizz, a lot of gain, and it just didn't carry. And for me, I found that the more bold the amplifier sounded with the mids and the gain, you didn't necessarily need the presence to get the kind of powerful, angry metal sound. And a lot of that as well came through my introduction to bare knuckle pickups, because when I had my War Pig put in my N4 and I was playing my JVM, I always kept the presence at halfway, and I really didn't mess around with the EQ too much. I found the pickup gave me so much power and so many mids that I just had a really angry, powerful tone. And then I just got really into that more angry, powerful, aggressive high gain tone, as opposed to that really high gain, gainy, scooped metal tone, as we demonstrated on the 5150, even though I love the tones we got just now. So that was a little bit of an introduction to my approach with the Kraken. As I said, there's no presence. What I've done here is set the EQ as I always do. Everything's at halfway. The gain's at halfway on gain 2. And something else we'll try is we'll use the 29 pedals Una, because as I said, it's an active EQ. The highs band is 12.5 dB boost at, I think it's 12K, I think. So we can get that presence with the 29 pedals. But also the Tube Screamer, we've got a Tube Screamer essentially in the Super Kraken with the preamp focus. It's a Tube Screamer style circuit that Martin developed upon my request, so that you didn't necessarily need that on the board. You can switch it in, but we'll hear the difference. In any case, let's hear the Super Kraken as I would use it with a high gain tone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to approach this the same way I did with the 5150. I'm going to scoop the mids out, I'm going to boost the treble, boost the gain a bit, see what we get. Scoop the mids even further. Going to do what we did with the 5150 and then see what this sounds like. So, by scooping the mids even more, it feels way more like an American, so almost like a classic Mesa, or at least in the room it sounds more like that. Let me go back to my original controls. I'm going to keep the gain up, but this is what I usually have it set at. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to throw on the max on with the current settings and see what happens. So I think the first thing as I said before on the 5150, I can hear that it's messy. I'm going to pull out the mids, boost the high end a bit. So this is without the Tube Screamer. Let's throw on the max on. I like that, nice and thick. What I'm going to try now is throw on the preamp focus. Back to the tube screamer. Next, what I want to try is incorporate some of that presence back into the Kraken by using the 29 pedals. The dip switch is all the way up on the high end, so. As soon as I switched over to the Kraken, I noticed that it was missing, not missing, but it didn't have that high-end fizzy information that the 5150 had, which is what I think people associate with metal. But honestly, I mean, what I'll get John to do is go between some chugging from the 5150 near the end where I was dialing it in and some chugging from the Kraken just now. And I wonder, when they're double tracked, which one's gonna work better in a mix. I want to say the Kraken because you can add that presence area in EQ, and by having less of that in the input, as in when you're tracking in, I somehow feel like it'd be more forgiving overall to the mix, but also it's still gonna sound aggressive. Like, I can clearly hear the inspiration when they're side by side, the way they feel and the way they sort of bark at you. I'm just gonna go back to my original settings, but I'm actually gonna boost the treble and back off the mids just a touch, and I'm gonna use the tube screamer. And this is pretty much, I think, more or less now, having done this video, where I'd probably set it. By me putting the mids back up, it's now gotten too harsh for me. I need to have, if I'm going to use a tube screamer, I need to have the mids scooped. For me, this is way better. But also, it makes for a nice lead tone. to find a metal tone that I'm happy with. If I'm using a tube, if I'm going the classic route of using a tube screamer in front of a high gain amp, I have to scoop the mids. Maybe that's obvious. For me, it was a bit of a learning curve just now. I felt way happier with the tone for metal, for chugging, for high gain rhythm, by scooping out the mids and using a tube screamer. If I'm not going that route and I'm doing more what I personally like to do, which is, you know, I guess like the Toska thing, chords, big extended chords, and I guess more aggressive, like, I don't know what kind of riffs I write. I guess this started out as a how I dial in my metal tones, but what ended up happening was I was showing you my approach to my kind of high gain metal tones, and then actually discovering how to achieve more of that classic metal tone. So it's kind of been a learning curve at the same time as sharing some of my knowledge with you as well. In any case, I already knew this, but 5150s, there's a reason why everyone loves them for metal. They're absolutely sick. And I have to say, putting this side by side with it, it's been really cool to dial in more of a classic metal tone. I don't really do that with this amplifier. That's not what I use it for. But I found that you can get really satisfying, chuggy metal tones with it as well. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Please suggest other dialing in style videos for me to show you guys. I have merch now, as you can see. I've got Mike in the background modeling one of the nice long sleeve white shirts. I'm wearing the guitarist tarot design. I've got bassist and drummer tarot designs as well. Please, if you want to check out one of these shirts, sleeplessapparel.co.uk. To get one of these shirts. If you want to listen to my music, check it out in the description box below. I've got all the links for everything I've released thus far. But thank you for watching this video. Please like the video, subscribe to my channel if you want, share it with your mates. Until next time, I've been Rabea, and I'll see you all very soon.